It's for real.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Nostalgia Crackdown here on the Let's Get Ready Network. I'm Adelia, that's my buddy Josh, and this week, or this month, I guess I should say, we are discussing the best players in the Schmoedown who never reached a championship match. Josh, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. I think this is a great topic because we always talk about the best players who never won a belt, but we can take that even a step further, who never even got a chance to play for a belt. And I think it's an interesting category because it actually is less players than you would think.
It is less players than you would think. Doing this, I counted up how many competitors actually played in a championship match, whether it be singles teams, IG, or Star Wars in the league, and there were 57 different competitors who competed in a championship match.
Yeah, and I feel like most of those competitors at some point won a belt. There's not a lot of players I can think of off the top of my head who made the championship match but never won the belt.
Yeah. So let's start talking about some of them. And one of the competitors that came to mind first when I thought of this was Barbarian. Barbarian had a 6-4 record in singles. He was 3-3 in Intergeekdom, and he lost two number one contenders matches in singles, and he lost a number one contenders match in IG. Barbarian, obviously one of the best players that the league saw that never wore a belt, but I hadn't even really thought about it until we came up with this topic, that he never reached a championship match, which is kind of surprising to me because Barbarian was a very good player.
Absolutely. I mean, his accuracy was always at top of the league level and championship level. But to me, when I think about Barbarian, it really isn't a story of opportunities, if you will. He only played one teams match, if you think about that. That's insane for someone who showed out so well in singles. And what happened is he was on, most of the time, two different very stacked Finstock exchange teams, and he was not chosen for the tournaments a lot of times. And that's where you can go on those big runs and get to that championship. You look at, I remember it was crazy because he's been in the league for a bunch of years, but it was only the last season, I believe, that he got a teams match, despite showing so much promise in singles. And that's because there was a time where Griffin Newman and Khan got the chance over him in the teams tournament. And they were focusing on showing all their younger players. And then when it was the Merle, Bateman, Riley, Roca era with Barbarian, because all those players are vets and they obviously got the nod over Barbarian. And Barbarian just never had a chance in teams and alone. And the fact that he was able to get a number one contender match in IG is a great accomplishment. And in singles, the one time we saw him in the singles tournament, he made the finals and only lost to his teammate, Griffin Newman. So it's all about opportunities. I feel like if Barbarian was maybe drafted by a different team, if he was, let's say, a rock star, I feel like just because he would have gotten more opportunities and would have been focused on more, would have been the star of the faction, I think he would have gotten that belt because it's amazing that, again, only one teams match, which is incredible if you think about how good he was in singles.
Yeah, absolutely. And his teammate in that teams match was Gold Leader, who perhaps the only player I can think of in the Star Wars division to have lost 3 number one contenders matches. He lost to Thomas Harper and both the Dimilantes. He had a 6-3 record. Those were his only 3 losses were in number one contenders matches. So he, in my opinion, is the best Star Wars player never to reach a championship match.
Absolutely. I think Star Wars is such an interesting division because it really is you have these legends, maybe legendary championships, one of the greatest champions ever. But there's so many competitors that get so close, and I think we could even do a whole episode with this category just on Star Wars alone. When we talk about Molly Damon. Laura Kelly did reach a championship match, but never won a belt. She's one of the few competitors that did reach a championship, but never won the belt. I think I'm trying to think of the guy who lost to Harper but played a perfect game. Zach Burkett. That's it, Zach
Yeah.
Burkett. So, but Gold Leader was the top of that list because he was incredible in non-number one contender matches. And then it always seemed like a number one contender match. And it wasn't that he would fall apart, but his opponent would just play much better than him. And it never felt like those games were even close, which was so fascinating. Like looking back on those games, I can't really even remember a time in those matches where I'm like, oh, I think Gold Leader's going to win this. It almost felt immediately that it was like, oh, Gold Leader missed a round one question. That's a bit unusual. I think Harper went perfect in his match against Gold Leader, but
I think you're right about that.
I never felt like Gold Leader was so dominant in the non-number one contender matches, and then you just get to the number one contender match, and it felt like you were watching a different player. And I'll also quickly say about Gold Leader is out of the gate, his character work was phenomenal, and you could just feel that if he ever got that gold or at least got to a championship, then it felt like he could have been one of those stars in the league that could have both the character work and the knowledge. And there's very few competitors that can have that. And going back to back with Barbarian and Gold Leader, just because of those two players alone, it almost felt like the Finstock Exchange was cursed because those two players were extremely, extremely talented. And there was a moment where Newman didn't win a title, despite being so great in the tournaments. Barbarian didn't win a title. Khan didn't win a title. Gold Leader didn't win a title. And then Newman and Khan were able to break the curse in their teams match. But there was a while where the Finstock Exchange had such talent on the roster. And despite that talent, they had trouble getting to the championship match, let alone winning the championship match.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that two of those losses of Gold Leaders were finals of Star Wars tournaments in the same season is just insane to me.
I know. It just goes to show you how good Harper, Demolantas, and Damon were. That you have these incredible players, but like they were so good in the clutch that they could only lose to each other. Really,
Yeah.
that's the only way.
Yeah. The next two people that we're going to talk about were actually at one time teammates. But I thought that they were both phenomenal players on their own as well. And no number one contenders matches for them as a team or in singles, but you can't argue that Video Drew and Tom were not fantastic players, among the best of the best to never make it to that point. And like I can say this, like I'm Video Drew's moderator. I've been in study sessions with her and for 3 years, and she's a phenomenal player. She had one of the few perfect games by not perfect game, but matches without losing a question by a player that we've ever seen from a female player. Like it was just, she had a 2-4 record in singles, but her losses were to Brendan Meyer, Mark Riley, Marisol McKee, and Griffin Newman. And she was 2-2 with Tom in the Looney Bin. Lost her other two teams matches. Phenomenal match against Jen Kemp there for that was a live match as well on a pay-per-view. Video Drew, everybody remembers how good Drew was with her character work. She's in my opinion the best character, like full-on character that we ever had in the Schmoedown. But I think she is highly underrated as far as her skills go with movie trivia. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it felt like with all her matches, it never felt like it was a lost fight. With some of these like high character competitors, it felt like they would have a match or two where it's just like, oh, they don't have it and they're getting blown out. That was never the case with Video Drew, at least in my opinion. It always felt like she was in it, that she could come back in some way, and she always put up an entertaining fight or show. And even if she was losing, you didn't keep in mind of that because of how good the character work was. And it was one of those things where, first off, if she was ever even to get to a number one contender match, I think the league would go wild. The league went wild with her at 2-4, let alone if she were able to have enough of a win streak to possibly win a belt. And I also do think that I think a lot of people would agree with this. The Looney Bin was broken up too early. They were one of the biggest casualties, in my opinion,
That
of
first
the
draft.
of that first draft. Really, like I love the drafts and I love the aspects of that, but they have never been able to figure out teams in that sense. It felt like very promising teams were getting broken up every year because of these drafts. It felt like there was no. It was tough to have continuity within teams and keep teams without like hamstringing the draft in a lot of ways. And I think one of the greatest what ifs in Schmoedown history, and I'm sure we're going to do a what ifs episode on this nostalgia crackdown, but I'll just spoil one of my picks for greatest what ifs is if and this is one of the most famous moments in Schmoedown history, if the Paddington 2, I believe the team name was, doesn't challenge their own question and beat the family, then I think what happens is Looney Bin is going to be protected because they're a top 5 team instead of the family. And because of that, I think Looney Bin would be protected in the draft and would be able to continue as a team going into the next season. So I think it would be fat because they had a really good tournament run, and Drew was already getting better as a competitor and already getting more
Mhm.
interested in the game and the strategy. And I think if they had that second year to shine, because they were only 2-2, they would probably be 1 or 2 matches away from at least a number 1 contenders match. So it was one of those ones where, again, this is partially the reason of this is circumstance. I think if the Looney Bin stayed together after that first tournament run, I think they would absolutely at least get to a number 1 contender match, let alone a championship match. And I think it would have been fascinating to see their growth as a team if they would grow. And we can talk about, I guess, the other part of that team, which was Tom.
Yeah, Tom had a 2-1 record in singles, but his only loss was to Ethan Irwin. All of his singles matches were in the 2020 tournament, and he was again 2-2 with Drew and Looney Bin, and then 0-2 with Tom and Paul as a member of the Den. And then that was the end of Tom. We never had him come back to the Schmoedown after that. So I thought he was a phenomenal player. Like, he had killer round ones all the time. And he didn't necessarily get the opportunities as a singles player that I think he should have. But that part of that, again, is going to go down to the fact that the COVID hit and it turned into that weird season. And it's unfortunate that we never got more out of Tom than we got. But I agree with you on the Looney Bin. They got broken up way too soon. And I really wish we could have seen what a reunited Video Drew and Tom would have done in a later season of the Schmoedown if Tom had come back. So, what do you think about Tom?
I think Tom's an interesting because the knowledge was always there. You could just see it based on his round one, it's based on how well he knew his stuff. And it wasn't even just round ones, it was round 2 as well. His only singles loss was to Ethan Irwin. He didn't play that much. And there was a part of me that's also, I think the biggest weakness with Tom was passion for the game. I think there are moments where you can see that like Tom was just there to answer movie trivia, do a bit of character work, but it never felt like he was. And I could be maybe unfairly projecting, but it never felt like he was in love with the game the way Video Drew was, the way other competitors were, and he almost. I don't want to unfairly project, but it it felt like it just felt like he was okay with not getting matches, that he was okay with not being a champion. And it's tough to read sometimes with his character, of course. But I do wonder if he had a more dominant personality, like saying, no, I need the matches. I'm the best player on the team, something like that. Or if there was just a situation where it wasn't COVID or the Looney Bin was still together and he still had Video Drew next to him as a driving force for that passion for the game. Because one thing about Drew is you can never say she wasn't passionate for the game. She really showed how much she loved the game and how great she was at all aspects of the game, whether it was character or the trivia portion. But again, I just wish we saw more of Tom, and I think him walking away early from the game is also just a part of that. It wasn't he had the knowledge to win, but I'm not sure if he had the drive. And I think that might be unfair to question. Adelia, what do you think about that? Is that unfair?
I think Tom's character was so deadpan in not showing emotion of any kind that we kind of never really got a read on how passionate he was for the game necessarily. I mean, like when I think about Tom, I think about his killer ways of answering questions, but then I also think about the fact that he'd give the post match interview and Drew would be doing all the talking, and then Tom would just say, "Do you want to see a dead body?" or whatever that line was.
Yeah.
He seemed very committed to that bit of the character, which was great. The character was great, and he and Drew were perfect together as a team as far as their characters go. But I think maybe like I can understand why people would think, oh, he didn't have passion for the game or whatever, just based on how the character work was. But I think it might be a little bit unfair because we simply don't know what Tom's real feelings were because he was constantly in character. He was never out of character.
That is true. That is true. And I sometimes do have to check myself sometimes because I am such a fan of the game and of the character and of that. And certain characters are almost made for you to feel a certain way. And I think part of Tom's character was about not caring. So it's unclear of whether we take Tom out of the character if he did have a passion for the game, and we don't know for sure. So I think you're right on that, and I do have to check myself on that. And I do think probably that's unfair, but it is fascinating just how little opportunity he got, despite being in one of the most either famous or beloved teams in the league, because he felt like his stock was so high after the Looney bin, and then we don't see him in singles until the tournament season, and then I don't know when but we got one Tom and Paul match, which he lost. And because he lost, it took forever to get another Tom and Paul match, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and that was also that same COVID season where I think their first match was in person in the old studio
Yes.
at Collider, and then they didn't get another match until the teams tournament, and they lost their first match. It's really hard for me to judge the team of Tom and Paul Preston because I think they could have been really really good. It's just that season got so screwed up because of the pandemic and all having to go to the digital era and how it suddenly when they ran out of studio matches there were a few matches that weren't tournament matches to end the season, but most of the rest of that season is just tournaments. So I think it's a little difficult to judge that team personally or anyone for how they necessarily did or didn't do in the rest of that season because everybody was just trying to make the best of it and deal with internet problems and deal with the digital format, which nobody, unless you had been watching all the matches, which, a lot of people still did, you didn't necessarily know what to expect when you were filming and stuff like that.
I also, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that first match was against Deep 13. And I
I
think
think
that
so,
was
yeah.
like a famously bad like wheel choice, either spinners or opponents. I think they gave Deep 13 something that was um was it Pixar, and Whitney was really good at Pixar, or maybe it was something with Alonso, but maybe I'm misremembering that. And part of it was I'm not sure how good Tom was. Always fantastic with the knowledge, but when it came to the knowledge of the game, I think that was like a big snafu, or at least a moment where it's like, oh shoot, he doesn't have this aspect down like
Yeah.
other
Shout out to
competitors.
whoever maintained the Schmoedown wiki
Oh
on
yes, thank
fandom.
you.
I just looked it up. They had a opponent's choice, and they were given romantic comedies.
Oh, okay.
Which is when you
Does
think
it
of
say what
Tom and
Deep 13
Paul,
got?
let me look. They had opponent's choice, and were given festival darlings.
Oh, and Alonso was on that team, so
Yeah,
I remember now because Alonso said in the post interview that like a whole thing about how much he loves Festival Darlings and how much he knows about a Festival Darlings. So yeah,
yeah,
that's just a moment where again, part of it is you can have all the knowledge, but so you need that second part, which is the knowledge of the game.
yeah. For this next person we're going to talk about, I'm just going to let you talk because I will say some things when you are done. But you are the world's biggest Brandon Hanna fan, and Brandon
Yeah.
was a very good player. So go for it.
I mean, I remember early on, Brandon had so much. He looked so good in Inner Geekdom. Like, what people don't remember is his first match was like a 5-way where Chandru was in it, and he was the winner of that match. And it felt like at the beginning of his career, it really felt like out of it was a 4-way actually with Chance, Keenan Marquis, and Chandru. And it really felt like he was like the rising star. His accuracy was on point, and it really felt like, oh, this guy's going to be competing for championships. At that moment, I didn't even think that he wouldn't have a championship match under his belt, at least a championship match. But really, the fall is once he lost to Chandru again, and then he lost to Chandru again. I think part of this is it got real. It's tough when you play someone and lose to them and immediately play them again. To me,
Yeah.
I'm like, you have to have some matches in between because losing to Chandru twice in a row just kills the rivalry, but also kills the character in some ways. It's really tough. And then he was able to just go win, loss. And he was actually had two team he what's it called? He had two teams that looked pretty solid. Um he had category 9 and plot twist. Both those teams I thought were very solid. He had Jader as a teammate and Liz Shannon Miller as a teammate. And
Yeah.
he would always have not only the IG slice in his background, but I also think he was able to keep up in round one at least enough to make those matches competitive, which is important. What I'll also quickly say about Hannah is what people don't remember during that COVID season is he was going on the Chandru path. Like if he has a brutal match against Alex Damon where he's winning the entire match and then he loses on the 5-pointer. In my opinion, if he beats Alex Damon, and even if it's a close match between Mike Kalinowski, and I never thought Hannah's heel work was as good as Chandru's at its peak. However, I think he would have became the Chandru of the league in a lot of ways if he was just able to get some momentum in that tournament. However, he never got enough momentum ever since the two straight match losses to Chandru. And I will also say he's the character that I feel the worst for just because of like he's doing a million. He might be the character that is the most has the most gimmicks throughout his whole career, trying out the most stuff, giving it. I like he's always at least putting in the effort character wise, even if he's not the best at it at moments. But he's had so many different characters that I do respect it. At a point where he even became face at the end with the Mercs, where it was like, do we really buy it? Buy it? But that was part of the character. I thought the question is, does the audience buy it? Is he really good, or is he just pretending to be good? And I always thought he gave it his all, both on the trivia court, but also on the character side. And I always thought, as when it came to scheduling, it was just a rough schedule. And there was also, I think, a moment in time where after that Alex Damon match, his accuracy just takes a plummet, a dive. Because it was like at like around 80, I think 85%. And then it went all the way down to like in the 70s. And I wonder what the change was there. Was it the questions? Was it the new categories? But he was always someone who was in the mix and who felt like he was a step away from not only just being a great Schmoedown player and getting to a championship match, but also a step away from becoming one of the best characters in the league. But he just didn't have the it factor in those moments. But I think career wise, he has one of the most interesting careers if you look at it step by step, each inflection point, each different gimmick, and like it maybe a gimmick ends too soon or one gimmick goes on too long. I know there's that famous COVID video where he has like a 6-minute monologue promo that a lot of people made fun of, but part of me does like respect like the goal to put that out and to go all in on that. So that's what I remember about his career, and I really do. And maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I truly do believe he was a step away so many times of being that great inner geekdom player.
I I don't know how. he would have fared against Chandru in the end if they'd had another match. But one player that he went up against a couple of times mini rivalry, if you will, or rivalry, whatever you want to call it, that really got to me was in the early days of the pandemic. That first Inner Geekdom tournament, he got matched up against Saul, and the back and forth between the two of them was great, and it remained great for the second match that they played. They were 1-1 against each other, I believe, and it just that's my enduring memories of Brandon Hanna was um, he could he was a great character and he was a good player, but I don't know that he necessarily was going to win a belt one day. You know what I mean? But you need people like that in your league. I would have
Absolutely.
loved to have seen Brandon Hanna win a belt because I do feel that one of the problems that Inner Geekdom fell into in the end was it was too much of the same champions all the time. I mean, there were very few people that were ever actually the Inner Geekdom champion in the league. I would have loved to see somebody like Brandon Hanna go on a run and get that belt. And even if they only held it until the next match, he only held it until the next match, or he held it for a few matches or whatever. I think he would have been very good in that role. Should it have happened? Unfortunately, it didn't. But let's talk about Saul because Saul, I think, is another one of the players that is a Schmoedown what if you will, for me, is what would have happened if Saul had won one of his number one contenders matches because he was 5-4 in Inner Geekdom. 3 of his 4 losses, one of them was to Brandon Hanna, and the other 3 were number one contenders matches, losses to Amaru, Robert Parker, and Kevin Smets. Saul, I remember Saul is one of the reasons this channel sort of became prominent in the early days of the pandemic when this thing started because he came on the show and just cut a scathing promo on Brandon Hanna and the rest of the league, and it got some people's attention. Um, so I love Saul, um, but I thought he was a phenomenal player who had some of the not of his best performances in those number one contenders matches.
Absolutely. And like part of the reason everyone had their eyes on Saul in the beginning was because Hannah got traded away from the den when there was a Inner Geekdom tournament with only one competitor. And everyone was like, "Oh, this all must be really good if they're trading away Brandon Hanna, a seasoned vet who really felt like he could have won that tournament." And he almost, again, the Damon 5-pointer always is a thing that sticks out in my head. But Saul is one of those competitors where I was talking. It was tough to see the passion for the game for Tom. It was never tough to see Saul's passion for the game. He talked about how
Yeah,
seriously he took the league. He talked about how into the studying he was, and you always respected him as a competitor and how much he loved the game and how dedicated he was to the Inner Geekdom. And it's interesting because like really, I it really he you look at his road to those number one contender matches, and there aren't a lot of like big names really. Like the biggest name is Amaru Moses the second time, and that was a really great win. But like other than that, it's a lot of like Inner Geekdom players who are all like in the middle. And those number one contender matches he had, I don't remember the third one as much against Kevin Smets. I'll be completely honest, but I remember the first two was a bit rough. There were moments where it felt like it was a different atmosphere, and like it felt it was. I think his first live matches as well, so that probably also plays
mm-hmm.
into a factor. But it it definitely felt like we were watching a different competitor, someone who wasn't just because we saw him in going up to the number one contender matches, and when he wasn't playing those number one contender matches, he's maybe arguably one of the most dominant players in the week. He was knocking people out so easily, and he really felt like a force to be reckoned with. But then another person who, when you get to that number one contender match, it felt like you were watching a different competitor sometimes. It felt like some of the stuff that were his biggest strengths beforehand would I know this isn't the case, but would hurt him in those number one contender matches.
The
And
pressure got to him. It looked like.
yeah, and I think again, I truly don't. I think the Smets one was better, but I really do not remember the Smets match, Saul versus Smets match at the moment.
There's
But
very little of season 9 that I remember off the top of
yeah,
my head anymore.
but I think he did much better, and just by that match alone, I think you could have seen if we had one more season, he would have at least been in a championship match. Now it's very
Oh yeah,
tough because it felt like what, like you were saying about the inner geekdom, it felt like there was a tier. It felt like there was a clear tier one and tier two, which is so much beneath tier one. But that's because tier one was so dominant in what they
yeah,
were doing, whether it was Smets, whether it was Chandru, whether it was Mara Konopik or Mike Kalinowski, or even Rachel Cushing back in the day. It just felt like those competitors are just, you would have these promising players like a Jesse Swift, like a Brandon Hanna, like a Saul. I'll even put Amaru there, even though I was a big Amaru fan. I thought he was so close to winning that belt, but it felt like David versus Goliath when anyone from that level was playing against the other Inner Geekdom players, just because of how dominant and how amazing those champions were in a way. But Saul was one of those competitors that you can't tell the league story without him, just because I think he embodies the beauty of this league, whether the passion and the gameplay and the studying and the character work and going all in. I truly believe you a lot of what made me fall in love with the league and what a lot of people love about the league is truly present in Saul.
absolutely. Let's move over to singles and teams player that I think is in my opinion, is one of the best teams players of all time, and that's Lon Harris. Lon managed to balance the character work, whether he was the professor or the delinquent, um, with being a pretty decent trivia player, but he also sometimes got too much into the character work and made some mistakes because of it. He was 7-7 in singles, but he was 10-9 in teams, and he lost 5 number one contenders matches in teams, 2 as a member of the Harris brothers, with his brother Jonathan, and 3 with Paul Oyama as a member of Final Exam. And they lost to great teams too. The Harris brothers lost to Who's the Boss and Critically Acclaimed, and Final Exam lost to the Odd Couple, Shazam, and Lightning Time. None of those are fluke wins, and they're just tough losses. They were all pretty good matches from what I remember, and Lon was just a phenomenal player overall. He's one of my favorites.
I would always say Lon is the competitor that can beat anyone on his best day and lose to anyone on his worst day.
Yeah,
And I think Lon was so good in the character that he would always get matches no matter what. And but I think even if let's say that he his character wasn't as good. Let's say he was the professor, which was a very, let's say for his whole career he was the professor, which was a solid character, a pretty good character. But obviously the delinquent is a lot of what people remember him for. But I think even if he was the professor the entire time, he would still get the matches just because of his gameplay alone. He was always fun to watch. And even if he would make a gameplay mistake, he always rolled with it. I think the most famous one I remember was missing the question because one question because he thought it was a bonus question. He lost track of how many questions there were, and he just
yeah,
didn't answer a round one question he knew because he was like, "Oh wait, that's not. I thought that was a bonus question. Oops." But
yeah.
I think he's one of those competitors where also a final exam was so close. Like all those matches against Odd Couple, Shazam, and Lightning Time. I think the Lightning Time one went to overtime, and it was such a close match. Like it really also felt like for final exam, it was like sometimes the ball just doesn't roll in. Sometimes it's like, the last second shot. Like I think about the Kawhi Leonard shot against Philly. Sometimes that bounce isn't going to go in, or sometimes that lucky bounce will happen to the other team. And that felt like it happened with final exam a couple times. It felt like I honestly, when I first thought about this prompt, I thought final exam did play a championship match. That's because of just how good they were. And I was I always like that lightning time match. I always forget that time because then lightning time plays Shazam, and that championship match wasn't great because it was an unlucky betting round, I believe. But man, that team was good, and man, that team was fun. And Lon is, you can make the argument, I think, just because he has three very successful different characters he plays within the show Schmoedown, and there's not a lot of people who has one, let alone three. And I feel like every single time he would change character at the perfect moment, at the like perfect time, just so we aren't getting too much of one character or getting sick of it one character. He was just a fun competitor and truly like someone who had the knowledge to be a champion. If he was just maybe if maybe some stuff went his way a little more, and also, if those like gameplay mistakes just weren't there at crucial
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah, if those gameplay mistakes don't happen, then I think for sure Final Exam makes a championship match, and even wins the belts. I mean, Final Exam was such a good team, and Lon was phenomenal. Uh, so let's talk now, though, about our last person we're going to discuss, who is, I think, holds the record for having lost the most number one contenders matches in Schmoedown history, and that is Andrew Guy, who he had a 3-3 record in singles. He lost two number one contenders matches, one to Roca and one to Ben Bateman. He had a 13-7 record in teams. Three number one contenders matches lost with Team Action to Above the Line, Top 10, and the Shire Wolves. And he lost another two number one contenders matches as a member of the family to Shazam and Corruption. Those are some heavy hitters that he ended up losing to in those matches. And I think Andrew Guy doesn't necessarily get the respect that he deserves as a player because of the way that like the two singles matches against Bateman went, because they were not great by any stretch of the imagination. They were terrible. Um, the But he was phenomenal. Andrew Guy was always one of my favorite players. When he transitioned into being more of a guy on the desk, he was still one of my favorite people in the Schmoedown. He was tremendous, and when you have a record like that in teams, you have done very, very well. So, Josh, your thoughts on Andrew Guy?
And this was something I would even debate in the old Crackdown. I thought Andrew Guy could have won a title either in singles or teams. I think he had the knowledge of the game down such to a pad. And if you look at who he beat, singles he beat Dan Merrill, Mark Riley. I don't remember the third one off the top of my head, but I'm sure it's
I'll look it up.
yes, thank you. And you look at the teams he lost to: Above the Line, Top 10, Shire Wolves, Shazam, and Corruption. Those are all incredible, incredible teams. Yeah, I mean, you could probably put most of them on the all-time teams list of all time.
Yeah, his singles win was against Robert Meyer Burnett.
Okay, so
And
let's focus on the Riley and Dan Merrill
yeah.
instead of that one. But I think that I truly believed, and I also thought if he ever were to come off the desk for a season to play, I think I would have even bet on him winning a title just because of I think being at the desk improves you as a player. And I think we saw that a bit when Team Action came back. And that's why people were so excited because it felt like Andrew Guy played so well in that match with Bateman when he came back that like it felt like this version of Action could actually win the title if they wanted to and if they set their minds to. And I think talking about like just the ball not bouncing a couple times, you could say that for almost every single match Guy plays in teams in a number one contender match. I feel like the Shire Wolves match could have gone his way. I definitely feel like the Corruption match or Shazam match could have gone his way. I think the Above the Line one wasn't super close, but none of the Above the Line matches are close. If we're being honest, like Above the Line was just when they were playing, they
Yeah.
were so dominant. It was impossible. It was very hard to beat them, and it's just I obviously think that they can beat top 10, but that was just a day top 10 got them because they've shown they can beat top 10. But it is fascinating to look back on Guy's career as because we always view him as a character, but if you view him as a player, I truly do believe that not only is he the best player to never make a championship match, I think I would make the argument, and I don't know if we'll do an episode on this. I think he's the best player to never win a championship belt. I think to be in those number one contender matches, to be such a dominant player, such a good player, maybe not dominant, but such a great player in teams, and to always be in those matches. And his tournament records when it came to teams was incredible. He was always an incredible tournament player as well. I truly believe, and I think he got the gameplay down to a science. We always credit Bateman as being the person who took Schmoedown strategy to a new level, but I think Guy should get like at least 25 to 30% of that credit as well. I think Guy also was someone who was so smart with the gameplay and knew how to improve his game. And if he wanted to, could absolutely study and be able to become a champion. But the character work was always, I think, either number one priority or definitely what he valued more. But I do believe that Guy always could have been a champion. And I, I, I have to think about it more. But I truly believe if I were asked who was the best Schmoedown player, not only just to never get to a championship match, but to never win a belt, I think my answer would be Andrew Guy.
Andrew Guy is definitely up there for me in that. Janine's another one who never won a belt that I think is one of the best players to never win a belt. She did play in that one championship match as a member of the Otter couple. Yeah, Andrew Guy, phenomenal player, phenomenal character work. I think arguably he might be the best actor we ever saw in the Schmoedown in terms of the character work that they did in the Schmoedown. Um, he was so good as a heel, and I thought he was just phenomenal on the desk as well. Really made that transition to being on the desk, and was just a great partnership with the whole thing with Ellis and needing Ellis to teach him how to be on the desk and all of that. I loved all of that. The Schmoeminati stuff when he sort of lost his mind for the Schmoeminati, I could kind of do without, but.
I respect
Andrew
though
Guy.
how in he went in on it.
Oh,
He
I respect
definitely,
how much he went in on it. I just hated that whole Schmoeminati storyline. But yeah, Andrew Guy, phenomenal player, and deserves all the credit for being. I think he was just as good as Bateman was. I really
yeah.
do. I just think he got unlucky in those in number one contenders matches to get to a championship
You can make the
match.
argument he's better than Bateman in teams.
Oh yeah.
Did Bateman ever win teams? I'm trying to think. I don't think Who's the Boss
Um,
did. Team Action didn't. Danger Zone didn't. I don't think
I
Bateman's
don't
ever.
think Bateman did. No.
I think he's been a. You could definitely at least say he's a much better team player just because of the family. Had much more success in Danger Zone, and Who's the Boss is definitely up there. But in my, I'll also quickly say about the Schmoeminati. I think the only enjoyable part of the Schmoeminati is Guy. I think Guy
Yeah.
takes was able to carry the storyline on his back just for a bit, even though some of the, and I wouldn't say the writing was bad, but it's more the writing didn't go anywhere because of COVID and because of everything that was going on. But whenever he was on screen, he made it work, at least for that scene. And I think like if he was consistently doing singles, then we might have seen him in a number one contenders match for singles. But it's clear he always teams was his pride and joy, or at least that's what it came off as. Teams was the thing he valued and what he was so good at.
Yeah. And I think Andrew Guy also proved from moving on to the family from Team Action was that um, he was just as good as Drew McWeeny, which um, I don't know that too many people really like comprehend that because Drew McWeeny was such a good player, but like Andrew Guy was a phenomenal team player. Like he deserves all the credit in the world for that.
Absolutely.
All right, that's the end of our list here today. Who did we miss? Please tell us in the comments down below. Josh, where can people find you?
They can find me here. I'm always popping up on LGR when I can, talking Schmoedown. But just follow all this. Join the Patreon, follow this channel, and you'll see me around.
Yeah, patreon.com/LGR_network if you want to help support the channel. $1 a month gets you into the Discord where we hang out and talk about anything and everything under the sun. And there's some higher tiers there as well. If you want to appear on Nostalgia Crackdown, you can do that by being a $15 patron. So let us know if we forgot anyone. You can find me on Twitter at Adelia Chambo. You can find me on the LGRN, the Highlights channel most of the time, talking some sports. Be doing a Playoff Beards episode soon. We just wrapped up the final episode of Starting 11 for the season because the English Premier League ended this weekend. So that's coming back next season. But go check out this week's episode. That went up yesterday. And until next time, you guys, we will be back next month. See ya.
It's for real.